introduce you to an idea of logic, discussion, debate, which I think is very valuable for keeping things clear. So you know what you're doing, and you know who has what responsibilities in the discussion. There's something in American law, maybe in other legal systems as well, called the burden of proof. The burden of proof works like this. Let's say it's a criminal case. So you have a prosecutor and you have a defense attorney. What is the responsibility of the prosecutor? What must he do to win?
Prove that the
accused
Defendant.
The defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. He's got to present an argument. I did change your word. He's got to present an argument that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If he does that, he wins. What does the defense attorney have to do to win?
Just make sure there's reasonable doubt.
That's correct. That's very important. The responsibility of the defense attorney is to create reasonable doubt. That's all. The defense attorney does not have to show that he's innocent. All he has to do is create reasonable doubt. The responsibilities of the prosecutor and the defense are not parallel at all. If the prosecutor wins, we have very good reason to think he's guilty. If the defense wins, we have no reason to think anything. In particular, we do not have any reason to think he's innocent. We may even really suspect that he is guilty. It's just that there's reasonable doubt. O.J. Simpson, who was tried twice for the murder of his wife, in the criminal trial he got off, and in the civil trial he was convicted. Because in a civil case, the standard of proof is just a little bit better than half. There was more than half against him. It just left a reasonable doubt. If you want to put it in quantitative terms, you imagine reasonable doubt is 30%. So you have 65%. You will win the civil suit, and you'll lose the criminal suit, because a criminal suit has higher standards. At any rate, in a criminal action, only the prosecutor has a burden of proof. Defense does not have a burden of proof. All he has to do is poke holes in the prosecutor's proof. If he does that, he wins. Okay, now when you're having a discussion, a debate, a knockdown, tooth and claw battle, the way Jews discuss things. But politics and morals and drugs and freedom and, should you join ISIS or shouldn't you join ISIS? Well, the kinds of things that undergraduates get very excited about.
Just those seems like pretty yes or no questions, which are all no. Drugs, no. ISIS, no. Politics,
Why
no.
drugs, no? Pharmaceutical drugs are perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, okay. So when you're having a discussion like that, one person is pushing A, the other person is pushing B. There are three ways to conduct the discussion. Really, it's two, but you could set it up as three. Either you say to the guy pushing A, you have burden of proof. B, for the time being, will just attempt to attack your proof and show that it's not adequate. You haven't succeeded in showing that A is correct. They have this discussion. For the supporter of A to win, he's got to prove, roughly, I'll change that word in a little while, prove that A is correct. For the supporter of B to win this discussion, all he has to do is poke holes in A's proof, which means if B wins, you don't know anything. You don't know if B is correct. All you know is that the other guy failed to prove A.
Yes.
That should have an effect. The guy who thought he had a proof of A will claim, I know A. I know A is right. So we say to him, oh, yeah, you know? Let's hear your proof. When he presents his reasoning and it falls short, he ought to then reduce his position. You're going to say, well, I've learned something for this discussion. I've learned that I don't really know that A is correct. I thought I knew it, but I now realize I don't know it. So even this should have an effect. So when one supports A and one supports B, and we're deciding how to conduct the discussion, one way to do it is to put the burden of proof on one side and let the other side just react to the proof. Don't ask him simultaneously to bear the burden of proof for his side. That's one way to conduct a discussion. The other way is to put the burden of proof simultaneously on both sides. Now, you could do it either way. And the world's a free place. You can choose to do it either way. But I recommend against the second way. Because you get confused in the discussion as to who has made a remark that supports himself or just weakens the other guy. If you decide to start, you can flip a coin which way to do it. Decide to start that one person will bear the burden of proof and the other person will be simply defensive to check whether the burden of proof has been successfully accomplished. I think you'll be much better off. This pattern goes back to Plato. Plato records or created Socratic dialogues where Socrates is talking to people about various subjects. And usually what happens is somebody says, I know. Socrates says, you do? You know? Let's check. And Socrates says over and over again, me? I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I don't have any positions. But you say you know. That's very interesting. Let's check and see whether you know. At no point will it be appropriate for the other guy to say to Socrates, okay, but what makes you think you're right? Because Socrates is saying, I don't have anything to be right. I don't have any commitments. I'm not taking any position, but you've taken a position. Let's see how well you can support your position. Now, I think Socrates is lying in a certain way, in a certain subtle way. And maybe if we have time at the end, I'll tell you why I think he's lying. But on the surface, this is where the asymmetry lies. This guy says that he knows. Socrates says, let's check whether you know or not.
There's a great scenario for that that I've seen in a movie and I've also read in a book. You talk to somebody saying, all right, I'll show you how debates work. Ice cream. You support chocolate ice cream. I support vanilla ice cream. Whoever speaks first loses the argument. Because whoever says you must have chocolate, all you have to do is debate why they're wrong. And then it doesn't matter if you want to support vanilla or not. Because the other person, as long as you poke a hole in their argument, then it's obvious that chocolate's not the best. So it doesn't really matter who's the best.
Not quite sure I followed that. But let's leave it on the side. Not quite sure I followed it. But at any rate,
I'm not quoting his properties.
yeah, I think it's crucial to do it one piece at a time. And when you do that, as I said, let's say the proponent of A is given the burden of proof, and he tries to show that A is correct, and the person supporting B pokes holes in his proof, and it ends up that he doesn't have a proof. That's phase one. At that point, the supporter of A should reduce his position and say, well, I thought I knew that A is correct, but now I see that I don't, and he should be in doubt. Now we turn to the supporter of B and say, okay, it's your turn. Let's see you support B. It could happen that he'll be successful. And if he'll be successful, then we will come to the conclusion that B is correct. Could be that he'll also be unsuccessful, in which case we will just have to confess ignorance and say, neither of us knows what's correct, and now we have to open up an investigation. What happens in discussions, the reason I push this as a methodology, is what happens very often in discussion is this. He's supporting A, he's supporting B. And he puts forth his reasons for A, and the other guy shoots him down. And then what happens is he says, oh, well, if so, prove that B. Prove that I'm wrong. Prove that I'm wrong. Just a second. Prove that I'm wrong. So the other guy says, you're wrong for this reason and that reason and that reason. And the other guy defends himself. He defends himself successfully. And then he says, well, you couldn't prove me wrong, so I'm right. But that's a mistake. Excuse me. If I don't prove you wrong, that doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means we don't know whether you're wrong or not. I couldn't prove you wrong. Maybe there is a proof that I haven't thought of. Maybe somebody else could prove you wrong. All you get out of I didn't prove you wrong is I ran out of ammunition. I ran out of resources. It tells you nothing about who is really right or wrong. And people get away with this all the time. They get away with this all the time. The atheist.
A lack of mutual respect.
Yeah, you're right. Ultimately, I think you're right. I think you're right. Let's take an atheist. An atheist will say, you believe in God, prove there's a God. I go through my proofs, and he knocks them down. He says, so see, I'm right. Atheism is right. Excuse me, that doesn't follow. That doesn't follow. He hasn't provided any positive proofs for atheism. He's only knocked out my proofs for God. What should happen if he succeeds in knocking down my proofs for God is that I should say, I thought I knew there was a God, now I realize that I don't. And so far, you, the atheist, and I, the believer, are in an equal position. Neither of us knows who's right. Now, you want to claim that atheism is right? Give me the positive views, the positive reasons for being an atheist. Give me your proof that atheism is correct. If he can't do that, he doesn't win by default. Nobody wins by default. You want to take a position? You have to support the position. You want your position to be reasonable? Give reasons for your position. Nobody wins by default. That's why it's important to conduct the discussion in this lopsided fashion. Put the burden of proof squarely on one person, and if you can't meet it, then you draw the appropriate minimal conclusion. Now we...
If you can't win by default, like by disproving the other person's proof, do they lose by default?
Oh, no, they don't lose. Well, it depends what you mean by lose. When they were claiming they knew, and they knew because they had a proof, they'll have to give that up. But you can't conclude that they're wrong.
There could be other proofs that
That's right. There could be other proofs in their favor that no one has thought of. All you can conclude is, again, let's go back to the criminal case, right? The prosecutor puts forth his reasons for saying the guy committed the crime, right? We raise reasonable doubt, and he loses the case. What do we know about the defendant? Nothing. Nothing. He may very well have committed the crime. We don't know whether he's innocent or guilty. All we know is that he couldn't be convicted in court, because the standard of the court is an argument beyond a reasonable doubt. So now, if you go through various arguments, you'll see how this happens. I just gave an example of the existence of God. And what happens here is that the atheist unfairly puts the burden of proof on the believer, and he sets up the contest this way. You prove that God exists, or I'm right to be an atheist. Then the believer goes through his proofs, and the atheist pokes holes in them, and then in the end he says, so I'm right, there is no God. You should resist that at the beginning. If I try to prove that God exists and you short-circuit my proofs, the conclusion is only that I failed to prove that God exists. And maybe, given that I failed in that way, maybe I should be less certain that God exists. Maybe I should remove my claim that I know that God exists. Doesn't follow that God doesn't exist, unless you, the atheist, can give me arguments that there is no God, and I can't answer them.
But you already said in the very beginning of the argument was already one-sided when the atheist says, if you can't prove me wrong, then I'm right.
But that's a mistake. Don't accept that invitation.
Exactly.
Don't accept that invitation. That invitation is based on a mistake. But it's a very common mistake. Same thing's true. People believe in absolute value. Objective morals.
What is a fact?
That certain things are unjust, period. Whether you believe it or don't believe it, like it or don't like it, whole societies reject it. What is right and wrong, good and evil, just and unjust is a matter of objective fact.
Everything is objective.
Can you do evil to do greater good? It's, what do you do?
That's not difficult.
Take one life to save 100?
In principle, it's not a difficult question. There are some cases where it's difficult, but it's not because of that principle. I lived through the communist era, where they were always painted as saying that the end justifies the means. And that was supposed to be a terrible fault in logic, and supposed to be a terrible mistake, and so on and so on. The truth is, there's no such thing as ends and means. The whole picture is clouded by a phony vocabulary. What you ought to do is, when you're making a choice, just look at the package deal and ask which is a better package deal. This guy has gangrene in his foot. Okay? There are two choices. Cut off his foot and he lives, or don't cut off his foot and he dies. Which of those two package choices is better? Is that a hard question? Obviously, you pick a cut off his foot and he lives. Is that the end justifies the means? There's no end and there's no means. It's just a package deal. I can end up with a live person with minus a foot, or I can end up with a dead person. Obviously, a live person minus a foot is better than a dead person. Dividing things up into ends and means just creates smoke. Doesn't help at all to understand what's going on. Now, when you talk about sacrificing one life to save other lives, then you're running into a question of, it might not be means and ends. Not meant to be means and ends. I'll show you some examples if you like. But you're talking there about whether your attitude towards what you should do or not do is based only on the value of the outcome, which is called utilitarianism, or whether also there are certain things that you can't do no matter whether they produce greater value or not. And that's called deontology in philosophical ethics, and there's a gigantic debate about how that should work. Are you aware of the trolley problems?
Or like putting yourself in danger for the greater good or whatever.
Okay, but that's you may have may have the right to you have the right to favor yourself. So that's not going to be good as an abstract example.
The downhill trolley that can't be no brakes and one person on the right.
That's right. Yeah, you're not familiar with this.
Rob that left Israel, he snuck out, faked his own death, and left in the coffin to go talk to the general, and told him, "You're going to become king," just to try and save Israel, but he didn't know for sure it would work. Unless he did, because he had shkuna.
Yeah. But I'm just saying it's a complicated case because there's an extra factor in that case. The extra factor is, do I have a right to treat myself differently from other people? And many say you do. So you're not succeeding in isolating the fact that we want to take account of. One of the tricks in philosophy is discussing a particular issue, try to describe it in such a way that other things don't creep in, so that it becomes more complicated than necessary. And there you're talking about putting yourself in danger. What would be a pure case would be putting somebody else in danger. Now here's an example. The trolley cases are an example. There's a runaway trolley on a track. And down the track there are 5 people tied to the track. And the trolley runs free, it's going to kill all 5 of them. But there's a sidetrack. And there's a way to turn a switch so that when the trolley comes to that spot, it'll go off to the sidetrack. On the sidetrack, there's 1 person tied. If I leave the trolley alone, it's going to kill 5 people. If I turn the switch, I'm going to redirect the trolley to kill that 1 person. Is it the right thing to do? To turn the switch or not?
I think I would have the leave to do that. Otherwise, I'm killing 4 people.
No, you're not killing them. It's happening without you.
Yeah, but if I have the physical opportunity to make it only kill 1 person, then I am killing those 4 people.
Now, suppose the one guy says, "I'm not in danger now. You're putting me in danger. What right do you have to put me in danger? I'm not in danger. Do I have to die to save them? Why do I have to die to save them?"
How is he in danger? The track could have been the other way.
It could have, but it isn't. In fact, he's not in danger. If no one interferes, the 5 will be killed and he'll be safe. So it's not obvious. So now a person
whose life is more valuable.
So a person who's a utilitarian says it's 1 against 5. It's obvious. Of course you should turn the switch. It's 1 against 5. Right? Others say, how can you sacrifice this one for the sake of the 5? Who are you to interfere? Now watch how it gets subtle. Watch how it gets subtle. Some ask whether this case of turning the switch and pushing the trolley down the other track is the same as the following case. The trolley's bearing down on the 5. I'm standing on a trestle over the track. And standing in front of me is George. George is very overweight. He weighs 425 pounds. If I push George off the trestle and he falls on the track, the train will hit George, kill him, and stop. And will not kill the 5. Should I push George off the trestle? Is pushing George off the trestle the same as turning the switch and pushing the train down the other track and killing the 1 person on the other track?
Yes.
He's not tied down to any track.
Who?
George.
But I can push him off.
You can.
Right? So then the question is, should I? Yeah.
I mean, it's different in the sense that I read about this case, but a lot of people choose the latter, they choose the former because the latter involves personal contact with this individual which is psychologically harder for people to do, and therefore they don't usually choose that option.
Okay, but there's an easy way out of that. I'm not standing on the trestle with him. I'm not going to push him over. There's a switch which will push him over. So in both cases, a switch. All right, we can get out of that easily enough. That's not the. Right, I'll tell you what people. This has been done, and it's been on the web for a few years, and thousands of people have answered the questions, and they've correlated them, and they've done a survey of philosophers on the issue. Here's one thought which brings out this other aspect, other than just utilitarianism. The trolley is going down the track. It's aimed at 5 people. It's a side track. And I could turn the switch to push it onto the side track. Now, for a moment, just for a moment, let me change it and say the side track is empty. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. Obviously, then I should push it onto the side track. Because when I push it onto the side track, I'm saving the 5. Right? The train is aimed at the 5. I push it onto the side track. By doing that, I'm saving the 5. My action is an action of saving the 5. Now, put the other guy, the single guy, down on the side track again. Still, my action when I turn the switch is an action of saving the 5. What I'm doing is saving the 5. Yes, as a consequence of saving the 5, one will die. But I'm doing the same action that I would have done if nobody was on the sidetrack. I'm turning the switch and I'm saving the 5. So here what you have is saving the 5 with a consequential cost. A consequence of a cost, right? That's utterly unlike pushing George onto the track. Because pushing George onto the track, I'm using George to stop the train. I'm killing George in order to save the 5. And there people say these are not equivalent. You can't kill one person to save other people. But you can save other people where in your act of saving them, and your act is an act of purely saving them, as a consequence someone else will die. Let's imagine that 2 people have kidney failure, and the only way to save them, this is ridiculous, but let's imagine, the only way to save them is to kill one guy, take his 2 kidneys, and transplant it to each of them. So the utilitarian says, well, it's 1 against 2. It's 1 against 2. If I do nothing, 2 people will die. If I kill him and take his kidneys and give them to the other 2 guys, 1 will die instead of 2. Kill him and take it. Other people say, maybe the outcome is better. 1 person dying is better than 2 people dying, but you can't commit murder to save other people. You can't do that. It's not allowed to do that. Irrespective of the fact that the world's condition later will be better, but you cannot kill 1 person to save other people. You can't do that. People's lives aren't built that way. The value of a human life isn't built that way. What that does is introduce a new type of factor, not just what's the better outcome, but how am I getting to the better outcome? I'll give you another example. Let me take one more example. You heard of Dr. Mengele?
Of course. Yeah.
So
Animal bodies and human bodies together and making things that weren't.
So he did research, and he wrote it up, and the medical profession worldwide has refused to use his research. Even though conceivably it could help people, but research achieved that way shouldn't be used. It shouldn't be used. The abhorrence of the Nazis is such that we don't want to have anything from them. We don't want to have any, even if it will benefit us, we don't want to have anything from them. That's an attitude of utility isn't the only factor. This is not against utilitarianism in the sense utility is irrelevant. No, utility is very important. Morally, it is very important. But other things are important also. And life is complicated. You have to take them all into account. Play one off against the other. It's a complicated world. That's the conclusion that I think reasonable people in ethics, and it happens to be the position of the vast majority of contemporary philosophers, it's a reasonable position that ethics is not one-dimensional. That means Peter Singer at Princeton is wrong, and his support of animal rights is just wrong. But anyway, now you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I was having a discussion with Rabbi Mendel, and he actually told me to bring this up with you, and I'm glad this debate kind of brings that opportunity. So we were having a discussion. During the World War II with the Nazis, they would go into a tent and say, all right, there's 1,000 Jews, you give us 100 of them, we'll let the 900 live. Now, here's the situation. You're one of the 100 that has been picked to die. You have the opportunity to escape and live. Guaranteed to live if you escape. But if you leave, all 999 die. Do you, by the Talmud and Torah, do you have the obligation to escape? Or
Obligation to escape.
if you can, should you take that opportunity, or should you stay and let the 99 die versus 999 die? But you have the opportunity. If you escape, you will live. Is it better that you live to go on, or to stay and die with the 100, not knowing what's going to happen to the other 900 anyway?
I think the case that you are describing is equivalent to a case that is discussed. It's discussed by the Rishonim, where the forces of evil say to a Jewish group, give us one of the group so we can kill him, or we'll kill all of you.
If that one can escape.
One second. I'm going to say something else. Now, the law is that the group cannot hand over anybody. They cannot do that. But what about his volunteering to go out and be killed to save the group? And according to the majority, it's a great mitzvah if he does that. It's a great mitzvah if he volunteers to go out and be killed so as to save the group. It's not required to do it, but it's a great mitzvah if he volunteers. Okay? Now let's take that fact and apply it to your case. You're asking the opposite question. You're asking, is he obligated to escape and let them all die?
If he can.
Okay, but listen. You're asking, is he obligated to escape? I say that since it's a mitzvah to save them, he can't be obligated to escape. I'm turning the thing around, right? Since it's a mitzvah to save them with his life, so he can't be obligated to escape and let them all die. That can't be.
But then again, he doesn't have an obligation to die.
So now you switch the question to, is he permitted to escape?
Right.
But that's a different question. That wasn't the question that he asked. That's why he asked, is he obligated to escape, so to speak, to preserve his own life? Certainly not. Maybe Maimonides would say so, but Tosfos and others disagree with Maimonides. Question is voluntary Kiddush Hashem, voluntary sanctifying of God's name by dying, especially to save the lives of others. And many say that it's a great mitzvah if you do so, which means you can't be obligated to escape, because if you were, then it wouldn't be a mitzvah. You can't be obligated to violate a mitzvah. That's not a cheshbon.
And permitted is a different question. That's
Correct.
That's where we got to, like, because it was first we were talking about, is he permitted to escape, and then I asked the question, well, if he's permitted, is he obligated? And by this, he's not obligated.
I think
Right. He can't be obligated.
I think it's kind of connected in theory, I think, to the whole pashkin for idol worship. Like, if you're forced at gunpoint, like, to bow down to an idol, or this guy's going to kill you,
Yes.
should you rather die, or should you bow down to the idol?
Right. There the law is absolutely clear. You must die.
Just as you must die
Wait,
before you
no,
take a wife.
I got that wrong.
I thought so.
I got that wrong. I did get that wrong. I'm sorry.
Want to try again?
It was something else. What was it? You like brought up the question like a little while ago.
Okay, so now the other question is this: A puts his gun to B's head and says, "Bow to the idol," and the law is that he should allow himself to be killed, not allowed to bow to idols. And there are two witnesses there to say to B, "Listen, we're watching you. This is bowing to an idol. This is idol worship, and we're warning you. It's a capital offense." And B says, "I hear you, but I can't do it. I can't just let him blow my brains out. I can't do it." And he bows to the idol. And the question I raised was, is there any penalty for that? Witnesses, warning, he does it deliberately. In a certain sense, he's doing it deliberately. He's doing it deliberately to save his life, right? Is he penalized for that? And the answer is no, he is not penalized. He's not penalized. Not penalized by the court, not by capital punishment, not by any other punishment. The heavenly punishment for idol worship is kares, being cut off from God. That doesn't apply either. There's some discussion later as to whether some minor punishment applies. But here's where the person does what's wrong and doesn't suffer a penalty for it, because roughly he was forced to do it at pain of death by somebody who wanted him to do it That's not a throwaway, that last thing. Under those conditions, he's not responsible for it. Now, can you make that work over here? Can you use that in this discussion somehow? I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, but that was the case we talked
I
about.
was thinking of a different case
Oh,
of something
That
else. I don't
it
know.
kind of relates to the
Yeah.
case where if you're fishing on Shabbos and you pull out a baby, or you broke Shabbos rules, you should be the capital punishment, but you saved a life.
so there, that's discussed explicitly in the Talmud,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely unanimous that you have a conflict of mitzvos there. You have a conflict of mitzvos. This is very, very important. You have a conflict of mitzvahs. You have mitzvah of Shabbos and the mitzvah of saving a human life. That's also a mitzvah. So it's a conflict within the rules. It's not external values and bleeding heart liberal sentiments and so on against the rules. It's it's a conflict within the rules. And then there's an explicit verse that settles that conflict. These are the mitzvahs that God commanded that you should do and live through them. And the Talmud says that means live through them and not die through them, and you don't have to die to keep a mitzvah. And you don't have to tolerate anybody else's death to keep a mitzvah. Human life is more important than the performance of the mitzvah, except for the three: idol worship, murder, and certain sexual crimes. So but what's crucial to understand is that it's a conflict within the rules. Not something outside the rules which take precedence of the rules from time to time. The way certain people would like to portray it, that way they get a little elbow room to eat cheeseburgers. You know, it's simply not correct. That's absolutely crucial.
But going back to the point of absolute value,
Yeah.
how would you apply that to some of these scenarios that we just recently discussed?
So there's a crucial background principle here that when you are discussing what's right or wrong or good or evil in a concrete case, that discussion rests on two pillars. One pillar is your moral principles, and the other pillar is your conception of the facts. And most disagreements about what is right or wrong in a concrete case are disagreements about the relevant facts, not disagreements about moral principles. It's very rare to find real disagreement in moral principle. And once I say that, one of the very important relevant facts is, does God exist? And if he does, what does he want? That's a fact. If a person is an atheist and subtracts God from the picture altogether, another person has God in the picture and God has told us what he wants, these two people have a gigantic difference in the facts that they recognize. Once the facts are different, so then the moral judgments that come out may be very, very different only because of the difference in facts. Is it wrong to eat cheeseburgers? There's no moral controversy about that. If the creator of the universe says don't eat cheeseburgers, that's a good moral reason not to eat them. I believe in the creator of the universe, and he said that. Other people don't believe in the creator of the universe, and therefore they didn't say it. We disagree about whether it's right or wrong to eat cheeseburgers. We don't have any moral dispute whatsoever. We just dispute the background facts. This goes on all the time.
Unless the meat is hot and the cheese is hot and there's no sauce or juice whatsoever.
What?
If the meat and cheese are both hot, then it's a biblical
hana.
Huh?
You can get hana.
No. Pigs you can get hana from. But basar b'chalav is asur b'hana. Basar b'chalav is asur b'hana.
Poultry?
Poultry isn't, oh, let me say this right.
Almond milk?
One step at a time. Okay, you studied some Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Let me ask this. Is poultry meat?
Chicken? Yes.
Depends who you ask.
Say again?
Depends who you ask.
It's muscle. It's muscle. It's meat.
Yeah, do you have any
I would
Jewish proof that or one way or the other?
Not really.
By the Gemara or Talmud? By the Gemara?
It's in the Torah, and I didn't realize it till a couple of years ago. I thought to myself, wow, look at that pasuk. When the Jewish people come out of Egypt, at a certain point they become very rebellious, and they ask to eat meat. And God says, okay, guys and gals, you want meat? You're going to have meat. What do they get?
Birds.
Quail. They get quail. Birds. There's no question that birds are meat. Basar, they say. And they get birds. No question that it's meat. Now, if that's the case, why isn't it prohibited by the Torah to cook birds in milk? Why isn't it prohibited by the Torah? The answer is the verse that prohibits milk and meat in the Torah is very specific.
Don't cook an animal in the milk of its mother.
Right. Don't cook an animal in the milk of its mother. Mother birds don't give milk.
They give eggs, which are...
Mother birds don't give milk. So it's a kind of meat that doesn't have the prohibition of being cooked with milk. The verse specifically excludes another kind of meat, bird meat. It excludes that because their mothers don't have milk.
So is it,
But it's definitely meat.
Is it Durabanan then not to eat poultry with dairy? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The rabbi said, and you see, this makes a big difference for the understanding the rabbinic law. Because before I used to work hard to explain what the rabbis had in mind. But now it's much easier to explain what they had in mind. They said, sirloin steak and chicken are both meat. They're really both meat. Only this kind of meat you can't cook with milk, and that kind of meat you can cook with milk. That's going to be difficult for people to understand. And people to understand the distinction between them. That being the case, the rabbi said, so as to make sure that people don't get mixed up and misunderstand and misapply, we'll tell you not to do it with poultry as well.
Is it only because birds don't feed their young with milk that
Yeah.
they make cooked milk? So like a goat feeds their young milk, so a goat can't be cooked in cow's milk.
Correct. This is another thing. Like the literal verse says, its own mother's milk, but it isn't limited that way in the halacha. It's just as deraisa. Any kosher meat with any kosher milk coming from an animal is perfectly deraisa. It's equally deraisa, not marsain. It's perfectly deraisa.
If it's non-kosher milk and a kosher meat or non-kosher...
Then this prohibition, the deraisa prohibition doesn't apply.
No,
Take
It's not kosher at all.
take
It's not kosher
camel,
enough either for
right?
Pastor
But
Chalav.
but not pasuk b'cholav, and therefore there won't be an iser hana, which is the difference that we talked
But you
about a
still
moment
can't
ago.
eat it because it's not kosher. So that's
Correct. Still,
not tahor.
but there is a difference because there won't be an iser hana. Now I'll just end with one. We're sort of going round and round here. I'll end with one observation that a friend of mine made to me many, many years ago, which I think is really fascinating. This law of milk and meat, the verse says 3 times. The verse appears 3 separate times in the Torah. Don't cook an animal in its mother's milk, young animal in its mother's milk, right? Well, the law is any kosher meat from an animal in any kosher milk. Either verse is much more narrow. Okay, the oral tradition comes along and says, yes, that's what the verse says for various purposes, but really, the law is any kosher meat in any kosher milk. Now, there's another law in the Torah about mixing things, and that is linen and wool in your garments. You must not mix linen and wool in your garments. It's called shatnez, right? Now, let's think. Linen is a plant product, and wool is an animal product. Couldn't you just as well generalize and say, sure, the Torah gave an example, but what's really prohibited is any plant product in any animal product. So take a piece of leather and sew in it a cotton thread, and you'll have plant and animal, and that should be just as forbidden. But it isn't. It isn't. And indeed, no one ever suggested to change either of these laws. No one ever suggested that milk and meat is only in the mother's milk, and no one ever suggested that linen and wool really stands for all plant and all animal. Now, if you thought that the oral tradition was a hodgepodge and a mishmash, and people forgot things and reinterpreted things and changed it as they pleased and so forth and so on, wouldn't you have thought that in thousands of years, someone would have suggested to make them equal? Either make them both general or make them both specific? But nowhere in the entire history of Judaism has anyone ever suggested such a thing, which indicates that we're pretty careful about keeping the tradition straight. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm even asking a question right now, but what about those hats that have bunny fur and like rabbit fur,
Yeah.
and some material holding it together.
So as I said, in shatnez, it's only linen and wool. Only linen and wool. There it does not get generalized. If it got generalized, that would be a problem, but it doesn't get generalized. Okay, we touched a lot of bases today.